Are you a leader that's trying to get their team to be more creative, more productive, more resilient, to actually work together? You're struggling with trust each other, work together, be more productive all together, pulling in the same direction? Well, welcome. I'm Heike Fallon, a personal high performance coach and host of the Empower Hour. And my special guest today is Donnie Thomas. He's the managing member of the Donatello Group, and he helps organizations to actually get their underperforming groups into high productive teams. And he is specializing on empowering leaders to excel and to evolve. So I'm super excited because he shares 3 key components that every leader needs to work on and implement, and love his story. It's fascinating. So let's welcome Donnie. Well, welcome, Donnie. I'm excited you're here, and I would love to jump right in. But before that, I'm really curious how you got to where you at, because the environment and taking care of teams is so valuable. But I know you had a journey getting here, so love to hear how you got here.
Yeah, so first, thank you so much for having me on your show. I've been highly anticipating coming on, and I'm very humbled that you asked me to come on and to share my value with your audience, as well as people who might not be in your audience, but might be coming in because you're bringing in value through this conversation. So thank you for that first. I will start with where I came from in order to talk about, give a little bit more context. I'm a Washingtonian, native Washingtonian, and I grew up in the center of the city in Southeast Washington, D.C. And so part of my growing up has a lot to do with resilience. But I never had the mindset when I was younger that, woe is me, I'm not going to make it. I always intrinsically had this idea and this feeling within myself that I wanted to learn more. I wanted to grow mentally, physically, spiritually. And thankfully, I grew up in an environment where my mom and my dad, they constantly pushed education and constantly told me to manage my emotions more effectively, because I did have a little bit of a temper when I was younger. I was a rambunctious young man, and I would get in trouble, but I was still like a valedictorian, when I was younger. And so growing up in Washington, D.C., I had the privilege of mentorship. I'll start, by talking about, by sharing a story about when I was coming home. I had mentorship from my mom and my dad, and I went off to college. I went to Florida A&M University for my first year and came back to University of Maryland, where I got a degree in finance and in information systems. And so I later went on to consult for one of the big 4 consulting firms. So I come out of school, I'm bushy-eyed and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as they say, and I'm ready to go. And so I'm walking home from work, and I just recall, it was extremely cold outside. It was December, and there was a group of guys behind me. And one of them kept saying, hey, do you know what time it is? Hey, do you know what time it is? And I coming from DC, as I mentioned, I come from very humble backgrounds, but I understood what he was saying when he was saying to me, do you know what time it is? And so I was preparing myself to get into a scuffle with these 4 gentlemen behind me. But little did I know that there was also someone in front of me who was with them, and I didn't know until he turned around with a knife in his hand, and he's like, don't run, don't run, don't run. And so, instead of preparing to fight at that time, I'm like, okay, I'm sandwiched, I'm going to run. And so I run, back to the train station, and I wasn't even upset behind that situation. I began to do a lot of introspection about why I chose the path that I chose to go to school, to seek opportunities to really work while I was in school. And these young men who were around, who looked to be around my age, chose a different path. And that prompted me to really sit with myself for quite some time. And I prayed a lot about what my purpose and passion, what my purpose was. And I just remember the voice of God coming over me and saying, your purpose is to help as many people as you can. And while that was vague, I was like, okay, at least I'm going in some direction. I got the what, but I needed to figure out the how. And I figured out the how through trying multiple things. And that led me to writing my book, What They Don't Teach You in School. And What They Don't Teach You in School is a book dedicated for the mentorless, like those young men, because that was the thing that they were missing. And so that I felt that they were missing mentorship and modeling, because I was fortunate enough to grow up with mentors and in environments that were healthy and productive for me to grow in a positive direction. So I sat down, wrote the book that was my labor of love. And from there, I shared within that book, I shared all of the lessons, or many of the lessons that my mentors taught me from my mom and my dad, personally and spiritually, from my real estate mentors who got me into real estate investing, to my mentor who got me really fascinated with the world of consulting and speaking and being on stages and training and things of that nature. And so I poured those lessons into that book. And one of the equations that one of my mentors would say to me is that, success equals preparation plus opportunity multiplied by action. And that always stuck with me. And so I took that equation and I really just applied it to my life to try just different things. And that's gotten me to where I am helping as many people as I can. And I'm doing that through a few missions, one with my organizational development company, and the other through my nonprofit organization that I founded, Dream for Success.
Love it, love it. Wow, what a story. I love that. And yes, taking action is the, the key component, I think, in that formula as well. Because if we don't take action, right, we can't expect any change or any growth coming. So tell me a little bit more about the programs you have, because I find it very fascinating, because where we overlap quite a bit is since I'm coaching my clients on their self-leadership, and environment really matters, and high performance requires a really good environment, but also so many other factors. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you work with companies.
Awesome. So number one, I think that there are pretty much three different areas I focus on. One, creative purpose; two, resilience; and the third is mindset and habits. I have this crazy vision that I believe that every company can really draw out the productivity of their employees and of their businesses by creating an environment that is rooted in not only creativity, but productivity. How that looks for each company is going to be different, but at its foundation, we really have to start thinking differently about what creativity means and what productivity means, especially in the advent of things like artificial intelligence. And so what I do is I help organizations to improve their underperforming teams by focusing in these three areas. One, again, creative purpose, resilience, and mindset and habits. Because looking at those things holistically, research has shown that organizations can increase their productivity by about 22% when they look at all of those things collectively. So that's how I help organizations. That's where I focus in order to help organizations to improve.
Oh, I love it. And so give me a little bit more detail on the creative component, the creative purpose. Like would you define that, and how to bring that out more?
Yeah. So thank you for touching on that. That's creative purpose in general is a topic that's near and dear to me because it's the guiding force. It's the guiding spiritual force, I believe, for all of us. But it starts at the individual level. And as managers and leaders, sometimes we forget that we're dealing with people who have their own independent dreams, goals, and values. And while I don't think that your organization can be your everything, it's just like a relationship with a person. You know, you have your spouse or your significant other. They can meet you in many areas of your life, but they might not be able to be everything for you. And so I believe that even in our businesses and organizations, I don't expect every organization to be everything, but it should be an environment where not only I can come together with other people for this collective creative purpose of this business or this organization, but also to achieve my own creative purpose. And so that starts with working with individuals within companies and performing and doing workshops to, number one, pull the teams together, figure out a baseline. What do you all think your creative purpose as a team is? All right. What's your creative purpose as an individual? And how do we merge these things so that you are feeling fulfilled when you come to this place and spend time with people day in and day out to achieve this mission? And so that looks like there are a lot of deep conversations that have to happen because a lot of times people aren't comfortable sharing what their purpose is or what truly motivates them, because that's what we're getting at. What motivates you as an individual? And they aren't really comfortable sharing that with the larger group. And so that starts with, I was coaching a young man who he was just starting out in his career at an organization, and he was in a very analytical field. But after many conversations, we discovered that he had a passion for sports, and it had nothing to do with where he was in that organization. And so what we had to do was really figure out how to merge the two. How can we get him or create an environment, or how can he create a space within this organization where he could pursue facets or parts of that passion while still supporting this mission? So that's just a snippet of how we start to draw out creative purpose when we're talking about people and organizations.
Yes, yes. And oftentimes I find too with my clients is they may have never thought about it. They don't have quite the clarity of what their real purpose is at times. So they may not be able to share it at first. That's why there's help needed, right? Because they may not know how to share it because they had never really thought about it or verbalized it or explored it more to really pinpoint what it is for them. And then it's kind of hard to bring that into a team when the individual doesn't really know where their purpose is. But wouldn't you say too, like, I find that oftentimes we skip over foundational components, and I find this definitely a fundamental component for functioning teams and individuals themselves as well. Have you found that in your work that a lot of teams may have skipped this fundamental component and kind of try to solve problems, but didn't even really know what the general purpose is and weren't able to bring each player in because they did not know what each individual person's purpose was?
Well, number one, absolutely. But even before we get there, I find that the environment itself is not even conducive for them having the luxury to start thinking about creative purpose. A lot of times we forget, you know, I know for myself, I'm extremely blessed to, even though I've grown up in some tough environments, my perspective on those environments were very different. Some people are in, when we transition into the work environment, some people are in work environments where they do not feel like the space that they are in is even conducive for them to sit back and daydream about purpose, and we don't create space for those things. And so the environment has to be such that we create space first so that the individuals have the mental capacity to start daydreaming and really diving into what their creative purpose is. That's why I really love when I'm working with organizations that create space for people to have coaching while they are perhaps on the job, because in many of my clients, they say, I've always wanted to coach, but after work, I have the kids. I have to make sure that I'm worried about my family. I don't have time to focus on myself in that way. And I was doing a little bit of research. Google had a 20% policy that they implemented within their organization, where they created space for employees, 20% of it, to take 20% of their time to dedicate to innovation, to think big, to expand their thinking. And so when organizations and when we ourselves create an environment where first the environment is such that, all right, now I'm comfortable, now I have the space, now I have the time to start thinking about my purpose. Now let me dive into this purpose. When folks start to talk about purpose, they start to think about doing stuff instead of things that feel right to them. Yeah. And I think that is also a difference in perspective, because I think even in that foundational discussion of creative purpose, we've lost touch, especially when we come into work. When a lot of people come into work, we lose touch with our feelings and allowing our emotions to guide, to be part of the discussion on how we make decisions. And so I'll just stop there, and I hope I answered your question.
You did, because essentially it has to do with how our brain functions, right? Because it's called the default network. That we need a space to not do anything, to actually think again creatively. And unfortunately, with the go kind of mentality we're in, and lots of companies, unfortunately, it's and it's hard because there's deadlines, there's things that need to get done to create that space. Is definitely a challenge at times, but oftentimes I think the companies also may think that it costs too much to have this extra space, but on the other hand, it's actually helping them being more productive. And at the end of the day, the bottom number will actually be better.
People realize that there's productivity in rest. Absolutely. There's productivity in rest. And I have been a victim of not resting, because I feel like I'm being productive if I'm up doing stuff, but there's productivity in rest. There's productivity in taking space from what we believe is the getting stuff done, because, and that's a luxury that a lot of people don't have, because they're so focused on action.
Now, have you noticed, I don't know, pro or cons on hybrid work environment, meaning like home office, in office? You work with all those type of companies, or is there a difference between the hybrid kind of versions, all in office or home? Because there's a challenge to create that creative togetherness.
Yes. The hybrid environment, it's had its pros, and it's had its drawbacks. A lot of us are talking about this wave of loneliness that has hit our society, and how a lot of people are experiencing loneliness in our society. But I think, and this is just me speaking, I think that that's in part due to the fact that we aren't out in the mix, in the thick of it, in our work environments like we traditionally were. Our work was a built-in social network, if you will. I was at a talk earlier today, and one of the senior leaders that was giving the speech mentioned that he was asked, well, how do you nurture yourself? And his response started off, he said, this is going to seem a little sad, but work is what nurtured me. When I feel like I'm, at work and I'm getting things done, and, I'm in the mix of it, that's what nurtures me. And he mentioned that work was his built-in social network. And I find that it's like that for a lot of people, who, especially those who don't have families to come home to, or partners or spouses to come home to, that it's a challenge. And so when you are working with people who love the freedom of being, remote, but also are battling with the fact that they don't have the connection that is very different when you're in the room. I
Yeah.
don't care what people say.
No,
It's
it
different
is.
in the
It
room.
is. It's a certain energy, and we do need connection. I mean, there
Yes.
is plenty of research out. We do need connection. It is vital for our health, our performance, and the sense of community and belonging is very different than on screen versus actually in person.
Yeah.
And it is a definitely a different energy, and that's why there's an energy in the room, right? And it's not the same
Yeah.
energy online.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, awesome. I would love to talk about resilience. I know that was your second component there. So share a little bit more of like how can different teams work on their resilience? What does a leader have to do to have their team be a more resilient?
Well, number one, you can't have resilience without allowing space for mistakes to happen and for people to bump their heads against the wall. That's one of the easiest ways to stress test your organization, to stress test the capacity and the capability of your team, because resilience is built through learning. Resilience is built through progress, and you aren't going to build resilience if you're in this bubble and you never allow bad things to happen. I remember when I was working with a team on a very, very large implementation of a system, and it was a travel related system, and you had all of these different teams in the room, and there was a situation where one of the individuals um, actually messed up. They were working, but they messed up on the code, on the configuration that needed to take place, and and they were trying something new. Everybody's going, oh my God, this happened, but I had to step in and say, hey, well, what did we learn from this? How did you grow from this? Because the issues and the mistakes are going to happen. It's not going to be the end of the world. We were able to recover the error in the system due to the configuration. What did we learn as a team from this? But I find that a lot of managers, especially, are under pressure to be excellent, to be great, to never make mistakes. And so instead of being able to allow their teams to have the freedom to make mistakes, they penalize the mistakes. But I'm sure you've heard of, fail fast. And that's a real thing. Allowing people to fail fast allows you to learn from all of the mistakes and come up with the greatest innovation through those failures, through that. And I think it's more so about reframing it as we're experimenting. Allowing the teams to experiment builds the resilience, because they've tried these different things and they have the grit and the will to continue to move on and proceed because they have the backing of their leadership. And so in terms of resilience building, one of the things that I like to try with people is calculated risk taking, for them to think about one thing that they're afraid to do, something that they're afraid of. Oh my God, I'm afraid to let my team, telework 2 days a week. Okay, try it. Or, oh my God, I'm afraid to have this conversation with my manager about what I want the next progression of my career to be. Okay, let's try it.
Yeah.
And so but as a team, teams will identify that one thing that they want to focus on as a team in order to build resilience, and it builds trust. It allows them to see that it's not that bad if you just allow the process to take place and trust one another, and trust one another regardless of what the outcome is, honestly.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So what I'm hearing is definitely the calculated, because it's not like just
Yeah. Just take a risk. No.
but it's all about calculate, but we have to kind of push a little bit the boundaries to explore. And like you said, big component for resilience. And I think the other really key thing that I'm hearing, it comes back to also trust. The team needs to have a certain level of trust in each one of them. The leader needs to trust their people and vice versa, knowing that, you know, if something doesn't go according to plan, I know my leadership stands behind me because it's a calculated risk, and we're trying this out and see what happens. And sometimes it turns out to be really good. So, you know, you might never find out if you're not actually going for and trying. And I think that kind of leads also into what you said, the third component being really a mindset. Going in with a growth mindset and you know, certain habits. So share a little bit more about that, because I mean, habits big big part of my coaching for sure, because if we want sustainability, we do need to create certain amount of habits in specific areas to make sure we can sustain, and it's not like you know, one time and then, you know, we're not really benefiting from a long term, especially when it comes down to health. But share a little bit more as far as the productive habits and mindsets.
Wow. Okay. So I think that the biggest challenge that I've run across in working with clients in terms of establishing productive habits is that they tend to look at these large goals. I had a client who wanted to focus on their financial well-being. So as I mentioned, I have a background in real estate investment, and so it just so happened that this client wanted to do some, you know, real estate investing in order to secure just a place for their family, in addition to, you know, some financially, in addition to some of the other things that they were doing. However, her perspective was just so focused on, I got to get to this number. I got to get to, you know, $10,000 a month in order to feel comfortable. And it's like, you know, let's break it down to the step. Like, let's break it down step by step. And so I like to do incremental goal setting, or to break the goal down into small manageable chunks, so that number one, they build habits, that it's easier for them to build habits. For example, for her, in her instance, her first step was saving, because after we had worked with one another, we had discovered that, well, in order to get to where you need to go, you need to have a certain amount of money saved in order to get there. So let's develop some small habits around that first. And once she got comfortable with that, and once we set that as go, okay, well, next. Now that's step one in the overarching plan. But she couldn't even get to developing a consistent habit because she was trying to think too big in terms about what she wanted to accomplish, instead of just saying, what do I need to do today? And it's often that thing that you need to do today that will help you to build that habit, instead of thinking about, you know, 3 and 4 and 5 months down the line. So that's just a little bit about the habit piece.
Yeah, which comes down to the taking action, right? Like we said earlier, right? Take action every day and you will progress. Now, when people work with you, especially coming down, I know you do an assessment, which I love, because I always believe you need to have a baseline. You need to know where your starting point is. If you don't know where you're starting, it doesn't matter where you want to go, because you don't know how to build exactly these habits to get to where your goal is. You need to first know where you're at. So share a little bit when companies want to work with you. They go through the assessment and you figure out a baseline where they're at, their team is at, and then how do you work with them?
Right. So what I find is, you know, it's all in some instances, I'll have a leader that says, you know, my team is broken. I need them to do this. I need you to help, you know, come in and do some team building and some organizational development for me, because it's them. First, when we have a conversation, I try to assess where that leader is, because we have to be the change that we want to see. Are you exhibiting the level of, are you exhibiting the behaviors and the resilience and the mindset that you want to see in your team? Do you not only show them through your words, but through your actions, that you are a person of integrity? And a lot of times people miss that step. So usually it's a leader that comes and says, hey, I need you to help me with this thing. So I first do an assessment of where I think they are before, saying, hey, let's take this assessment. But they take the assessment, and the assessment is pretty straightforward. It actually asks them questions that helps me to understand where they are in the 3 areas. But there's also a 4th piece. So it helps me to understand where they are with creative purpose, with resilience, and with their mindset as a team, with their mindset and habits. But there's the 4th part that it touches on, is team foundation. So it's all of those other things that we just talked about in terms of, we didn't talk about it directly, which is culture. It helps me understand where they believe they are with their team culture, where they believe they are with safety within the team, psychological safety within the team, trust, all of those environment, all those foundational things that need to be in place in order to allow us to work more effectively on the creative purpose and the resilience and the habits. And so once I get a readout on those 4 areas, that's when we revisit the discussion. Okay, so after our first discussion, you mentioned these things. Here is where I think, we might want to focus. And a lot of times, sometimes I have a direct conversation with the leader to say, and I'd love to incorporate you into this in some way, so that I can work with you to hand off this process, because they may need a little bit of assistance in some areas, but not really recognize it. And sometimes through working with them and through scoping this out, they realize, well, you know what, I am interested in inserting myself into this more. And the leader has to be a part of it either way, but inserting themselves into a way that I provide them a separate leadership coaching in order to, so that when I'm gone, they can take over the thing, because I'm all about empowering them with tools. I don't want you to have to need me. I want to be able to support you based on what I see. And then we'll come after we do the initial intake. That's when we set up the session. I have a program called the Culture Hike Team Building System. It's actually a 24-week system that's broken down into 4 different phases: planning, positioning, pursuing, and pedigree. Planning helps to set the stage for how we develop the team. So the assessment that the leader took, in a vacuum, the team is now going to come together. They're going to look at it collectively and as a team. And there's some exercises that I do to help the team think differently about how they make decisions as a team, because you're now a team. And so we got to work on making sure that you're effective at building trust and communicating with one another. So that's during the planning phase where I work on those specific things. Positioning, that's where we dive deeper into creative purpose, resilience, and mindset and habits. So with creative purpose, I talked about a little bit about one of the exercises where we start to dive into the individual creative purposes that each individual has, and they want to and how those individual purposes fit into the overall organization's purpose. And then we talk about resilience, do some resilience exercises, and then we taper that off with the mindset and habits. Pursuing I'm not sure if you're familiar with the grow model in coaching. And so that is where for that phase of it during the accelerator, the grow model is really used to facilitate the team coaching, because this is now team coaching through that whole period. And then lastly, that's when we talk about pedigree. That's the succession planning. That's where you talk about codifying a lot of the things that we put in place. And there's a workbook that accompanies this. And the way the entire program is built is it can either be, some organizations are large enough to where they just need to, for me to provide, or for us to provide the accelerator program to them, and they'll have their own facilitator or coach deliver it, or I'll work with them to come in and deliver this for their team. And that's pretty much it. And we do monitoring and support along the way.
Awesome. So obviously the outcome is definitely better teamwork, productivity, but what is the feedback that emotionally these participants feel? Because there's definitely some kind of shift, because once you start actually working on personal development, there's always a shift for the individual person. So what are usually people experiencing after going through the program?
Yeah, it varies. And I'll be honest with you. You have to, especially with in a coaching program, when you're talking about, in some instances, people are tapping into their deepest emotions and feelings in some of these environments. And I've had people to come to me and say, you've changed my life. This really has transformed the way I think. My confidence has gone up. I'm able to work more effectively with people. There have people who have said, it just wasn't for me. And I'm okay with both. I will always speak and come from a place of truth, because everything isn't going to be great for everybody. So I'm never going to try to sell any roses and everything like that. But the overall and overwhelming response has been positive, and that's what I like to focus on. The folks who have said, well, hey, this isn't for me. In some instances, I would say it's challenging for people to get in a group of their peers and to dive into some of these things, because you're now managing multiple relationships at the same time. And
well,
so, go ahead.
Yeah, and we're sometimes also, it might not be the right time for some people just because you go into a company and you're working with different people doesn't mean everybody at that moment in their life is ready for more growth, stepping out of their comfort zone and making big transitions or changes, but might often comes later. So I've had clients too where it actually the opposite. They get referred and they're supposed to reach out, and people check on like, yeah, no, I haven't reached out. And it can be a year or two later, they reach out. And then they're like afterwards, oh, I wish I would have reached out to you sooner. I didn't realize this will be so impactful. And I said, well, but maybe you weren't ready. Maybe you weren't ready at that time. So oftentimes it's also personal, depending on, what the background is and where each person is in their life. And it might not be the right timing for some people, and it might come later. And still, what you learn is still saved, and that's the cool part in our brain, right? It's saved as a memory, and we may recall it later.
Yeah, but while you're talking about that, what a lot of people miss, and it catches up with them at a later time, is a lot of the work that happens in between a lot of these sessions. That's when, what they call the aha moments happen. That's when, you have to do the work, because, people like myself and yourself who are experts at their craft will come in. But what I'll say is, and I told all the clients this up front, you have to have a team that's committed to this process, that wants it. You'll have those individuals who sometimes they can't stand the person next to them, and no matter what, they don't want to speak. They don't want anything from it. They've been told to be there, so they're going to sit. And you have to, but I will say the work, a lot of the progress happens in between sessions, because it may not necessarily happen in that moment. But I've found that it'll happen in between the session. They say, oh my God, I didn't like what you said during this session. You really held my feet to the fire on this, but after, thinking about it for a week, it makes sense. And so.
Yeah, it absolutely. I mean, even being, definitely in having this profession, I've been in this for so long. Even for me, sometimes things show up and like I don't grasp them really until a couple of weeks later, until my brain
Yep.
really just processes things. And I'm like, oh, that's what what it was for me, you
Yep.
know. I'm like, oh, that makes sense now from a couple of weeks ago. So as we work through, and again, every person has a different level at certain times, whatever their brain
Yep.
feels safe to do at that moment. And it sometimes takes longer, and that's okay. And for some people, they are ready to jump in and go for
Yeah.
it. Now, let me ask you, what have you found leaders usually miss the most? Like if there is, I know every situation is individual, but is there a common thing where you would go like, yeah, if leaders would start with this, that would already make a huge change? Or is that very, very individual, very different?
Um, I find that leaders miss working on themselves first the most. There, you, in order, empowered leaders create empowered teams. If you are not an empowering leader, or if you're not an empowered leader, it is going to be challenging for you to create an empowered team. If
Yep.
you're not a productive leader, it is going to be challenging for you to create a productive team. And people can see and sense the energy. They can sense the person that sits on their perch and says, get it done, but they aren't getting anything done.
Yeah.
They aren't getting the most minor of things that they're in a position to do accomplished, which is to lead. I believe that it's a leader's responsibility to facilitate the environment of growth for everybody that they're under, charge to lead, and that those people will then join in that idea and in that thinking. But if the leader internally is not emotionally or mentally at a place where they can create that environment, it's challenging. And I think, and I was talking with um, a woman, a woman who decided to change her position, a manager, senior manager. And what she told me, she said, I had to leave this position because I didn't have the time in order to be strategic, in order to provide the value for my staff that I needed to provide. I was just jumping from meeting to meeting and meeting and meeting and meeting. And as leaders, a lot of times we pat ourselves on the back. I was in 20 meetings this week. And that's how we, value, say we did work. Whereas the people, they're like, no, I was actually, doing the thing. I was actually,
Yeah.
I don't have time to sit in 20 meetings. But it was, her inability to have that space to think strategically didn't allow her to really start working on the environment. And there was so much, what I realized in that organization, there was so, after speaking with her, there was just so much disdain in the organization. The energy was low. But it's really a direct reflection of leaders not being able to focus and take time and space on themselves. And it reflects and shows, because the staff members, she was saying, you could see it.
Yeah.
And so when leaders don't focus on themselves and don't take care of themselves, now I get it, we're servant leaders, we're situational leaders. We want to make sure that we're served, where that's what we're there to do. But if we aren't serving ourselves, and if we aren't making sure that we're good and whole, it's really a disservice to the people we're meant to serve.
Oh, absolutely. Got to lead yourself from within first
Yeah.
before you can
Yeah.
actually lead others. Is there one like advice or tip you could give a leader to get started? Like, so one thing, if you do that every day, that would
Ooh.
kind of get them started. Is there something?
Ooh.
I know that's a
I,
tough one.
that's a really tough one, because, you know, I, I can speak from my story.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the thing that really helped me was taking the time to meditate, whatever you want to call it, pray, but really taking that time and that space to sit with myself without distraction, daily, and if not daily, as much as you can, it really was transformative to me because it allowed me to have empathy for other people. It allowed me to be more patient. It allowed me to tap into creativity, and the patience is important because it takes much longer to build something than it does to destroy it. When you're creating a new service, when you're creating a new product, when you are creating a new culture, it takes time, it takes patience. And it's been through that meditation and that time with myself that I've been able to tap into more creativity and more resilience and more and better habits within myself. So that would be the one tip I would say is
Yeah.
for me to do that.
Did you had a specific time you did that? Because for me, definitely was also creating space was the number one thing for sure that changed a lot for me personally as well. And for me, it was actually creating a better morning routine. I had
Yeah.
I had to roll out of bed, give me a coffee, and then see what happens kind of morning routines. And it wasn't until I changed that, being very intentional about my morning routine, creating that space for me in the morning, to have a little more the moment where I can think and I can kind of, check in with myself before going with answering anything from anybody else first.
Yeah.
Myself, but like, so for me, it was definitely doing the morning routine. Was it something where you kind of put it in midday, or what, did you schedule it, or how did you do that?
I'm so glad that you said that because I feel like I gave more of an example when we talked about creative purpose and resilience, but I want to dive deeper into the mindset and the habit piece because that's what it really speaks to. And for me, it was understanding what my creative cycle was, understanding the time period because it's different for different people. Some people are more creative at night than they are in the day. Some people are more productive at night than they are during the day. They have better attitudes, and some people have better attitudes in the day than they do
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
evening. And
100%.
so I had to understand. I had to again sit with myself to say, when really am I? Who am I? Like, when really am I most productive? Do I find myself more productive? And I find honestly, I'm probably more productive during the evenings. I like the mornings to be slower. Don't really like a lot of meetings in the mornings, but it sometimes is what it is. So when I can create that for myself, that space for myself to really dive in and be productive, I find um, I'm doing a lot of my mental work in the evening, honestly. And so I had to first say, when am I most productive, and set a routine around that. So for me, for you were talking about getting ready, I try to get ready at night because I know I like an easy morning. So I'm like, let me get everything together at night. Let me, take the shower. Let me, get all my ducks in a row so that when I wake up, everything's prepared.
Yep.
So I have to, I can get up, and exercise if I need to do that, things of that nature.
Yeah, 100%. That's where I always start my coaching with embrace yourself first, knowing also, yeah, when you're productive, what's your circadian rhythm? Because it is, some people are the morning people. I'm definitely not the
Yeah.
morning person for sure. And or you're like more the, midday or late evening kind of person, and really putting those type of things in your schedule when it fits best for you, your type. Because we're not the same, we're all different. And so like my morning routine does not start at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
I am not a morning person, but for me, it was very important to not have that overwhelm in the morning. So for me, doing that in my morning, which some people still think it's late, but I'm like, you know what? That's my rhythm. I'm
Yeah.
also more productive in the evening, and so for me, that worked that way. So that's I love that because at the end of the day, everybody needs to find what works for them. Give it,
Yeah.
and it comes back to what you said. You may fail by doing a morning routine super early, because I didn't even bother because I knew I would fail.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
trying out, see what works, and implementing, but definitely implementing somewhere space in your day where you can either check in, meditate, or just have room to not be pushed and stressed with
Yeah.
deadlines and meetings and, answering emails or what have you. I think that is a fantastic first step to get going for everyone.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because
uh,
it's for me, it's about this life that we're living and that it's about self-discovery. And for me, it's about authenticity, really being authentic and true to myself about who I am, what my likes, what my dislikes are, what gives me energy and what does not. And so, if and sometimes that's a hard conversation because we have so many experts saying you need to get up at 4:30 a.m. and you need to exercise at 5 a.m. And it's just like that doesn't work for everybody.
no. Awesome. Fantastic. Any last thoughts that you want to share? Because I know we could go for hours. I found this
Yeah.
super fascinating and really appreciate it. Because I think this is super valuable for any leader out there, but also anyone that, is part of a team, right?
Yeah.
And would
Yeah.
love to see more. Work together, more creativity, more high performance in a, as I
Yeah.
say, healthy way.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that the one thing I would say, in terms of the final thought would be to encourage leaders and people to be more authentic within themselves, to be more authentic with their teams. And that right there, I believe, goes a long way because when people see that you're being genuine, when you're being genuine with yourself, you feel better about yourself. And when people seeing that, seeing that you're being genuine with them, it allows the trust and the psychological safety to take root in your environment. And that's one of the easiest steps to creating that environment. And my goal really is to help everybody that I can to create positive and creative environments. And so I would just encourage the leaders watching this to be authentic with yourselves and with the people you choose to serve.
Wonderful. And all your information and how to reach out to Donnie is below in the description. So definitely check it out and check out his YouTube channel. It's actually awesome too. Great value there to kind of check in there. But thank you so much, Donnie. This was
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you.
And love to chat to you someday again. But thank you for today. Awesome.
Yes. Thank you. This was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.